Behind the cold steel bars of Blue River Prison, Mark Sullivan sat quietly in his cell, gazing at a faded photograph of a German shepherd whose eyes seemed to whisper stories of happier days. He wondered if Duke still remembered him, or if time had erased their bond forever. Before we dive deeper into this touching journey, I'd love to know where you are right now as you listen. Please leave a comment below, sharing the place where this story found you today. Inside Blue River Prison, the days passed slowly, blurring into a monotonous cycle of isolation and regret. Mark Sullivan, a quiet man nearing 50, sat alone in his cell, shoulders slumped under the weight of a guilt he could never escape. His thinning brown hair had turned mostly gray, and the lines etched deep into his face spoke of endless nights spent awake, haunted by memories. Once a cheerful mechanic from a small Montana town, Mark's life had taken a devastating turn that left him with nothing but remorse. Every morning, Mark scribbled letters at the small metal desk beside his bunk. His fingers trembled slightly as he carefully chose each word, addressing them to his hometown in Bitterroot Valley, Montana. They were always short, gentle messages, asking about Duke, his loyal German shepherd. Duke was a strong, handsome dog with a thick black and tan coat and alert, intelligent eyes that seemed to read Mark's every emotion. Now, Duke was all Mark could think of, his only connection to a world beyond cold concrete walls. He had never received a reply. Still, each day he hoped, carefully sealing each letter, dropping them into the mailbox in the prison's common area. Sometimes other inmates mocked him gently, puzzled by his persistent optimism. But to Mark, writing those letters was like casting messages into the ocean, praying someone, somewhere, might one day respond. Despite his gentle nature, Mark preferred solitude, keeping his distance from fellow prisoners. He wasn't unfriendly, just withdrawn, burdened by shame from the past, a past mistake that had led to tragedy, costing the life of an innocent person and devastating his own. He knew he deserved his punishment, but it didn't ease the sorrow he felt for those he had hurt, or the loneliness of a life lived behind bars. Officer Tom Bradford, a veteran corrections officer with salt and pepper hair and kind blue eyes, occasionally checked in on Mark. Bradford noticed the quiet dignity in the inmate's demeanor and respected his privacy, yet always lingered briefly, sensing the deep loneliness Mark tried to conceal. "Still no replies today, Sullivan?" Officer Bradford asked softly one morning, nodding at the empty mailbox slot near Mark's cell. Mark managed a faint, sad smile. "No, not today, Tom," he murmured, "but maybe tomorrow." Bradford sighed, giving Mark an empathetic glance. "Keep hoping, Mark. Sometimes that's all we have." Mark returned to his bunk, clutching a worn photograph. The image showed him kneeling beside Duke, both smiling broadly, carefree under the vast Montana sky. Duke's sharp ears stood alert, his eyes bright with unconditional love. Mark's arm draped affectionately around his strong neck. The photo was his lifeline, the one treasure he'd managed to keep. Late at night, as quiet enveloped the prison, Mark often whispered his thoughts aloud, as though Duke might somehow hear him. "Do you remember me, buddy? Do you remember all those walks by the river? The way you'd chase sticks into the cold water? The way you'd always come back, no matter how far you went?" He paused, his throat tightening. "I'm so sorry, Duke. I didn't mean to leave you behind." Outside his tiny barred window, the stars glittered in the Montana night, distant and indifferent. Mark lay awake, listening to the faint sounds of the prison, the soft murmurs of guards, the occasional restless stirrings of other inmates. But in his heart, there was silence, a void only Duke's gentle presence could fill. Yet, despite his hopelessness, Mark clung fiercely to one slender thread. Someday, somehow, he would hear news of Duke. He clung to this hope not because it was realistic, but because letting go meant surrendering to despair completely. Duke had always taught him loyalty, resilience, and unwavering faithfulness, lessons Mark now depended upon more than ever. In the cold shadows of Blue River Prison, Mark drifted into restless sleep, dreaming of wide-open fields, warm sunlight, and the gentle, reassuring pressure of Duke's head resting against his shoulder. Mark Sullivan lay awake in the dim glow of moonlight filtering through the small window, the silence of his cell broken only by distant footsteps of the night shift guards. His mind drifted back to the past, to a simpler, brighter time when he was free and Duke was always at his side. The memories, vivid as ever, gently carried him away from the stark reality of Blue River Prison. Mark first found Duke on a rainy afternoon, almost 7 years ago, abandoned beside a muddy road near Hamilton, Montana. The German Shepherd puppy was barely 3 months old, shivering with cold and confusion. Mark, with his quiet compassion, knelt down to comfort the tiny dog whose deep brown eyes already seemed wise beyond his young age. Wrapped in Mark's coat, Duke had pressed close, trusting immediately, as though recognizing Mark as the family he had been desperately seeking. Together, they became inseparable. Duke grew into a majestic German Shepherd with a thick, glossy coat, a proud bearing, and an unmistakably loyal and protective nature. He was powerful but gentle, intelligent but humble. Mark, who had always been somewhat reserved and introverted, felt a new confidence blossom within him through Duke's companionship. The dog was more than just a pet. He was Mark's best friend, protector, and emotional anchor through both good times and hardships. Life hadn't always been kind to Mark. He faced financial struggles after losing his job at the mechanic shop due to downsizing. Through those bleak days, Duke remained faithfully at his side, sensing Mark's sadness and offering unconditional comfort. The shepherd's warm head would rest gently on Mark's knee, his soft eyes silently communicating reassurance, reminding Mark he was never truly alone. But then, Mark's world shattered completely on the fateful night that led him to Blue River. A terrible accident, caused by one careless decision, robbed an innocent family of their loved one and plunged Mark into irreversible guilt. The judge's gavel sounded cold and final, sentencing Mark to a life he knew he deserved, but still dreaded deeply. As Mark sat in the courtroom, shoulders trembling beneath the heavy sentence, his thoughts raced immediately to Duke. Who would care for him? Who would understand how gentle, how special he was? He had entrusted his beloved companion to his younger sister, Laura, who promised through tear-filled eyes that Duke would be safe, loved, and never forgotten. Months later, in a brief letter from Laura, Mark received news that crushed his spirit further. Duke had been placed with another family after Laura had fallen into financial difficulties herself. The letter was short, impersonal, and left Mark feeling completely hollow. He had not only lost his freedom, he had lost Duke forever. In the solitude of his cell, Mark clutched the faded photograph, recalling how Duke loved chasing butterflies in the fields near their old home, his powerful form gracefully leaping, eyes shining with pure joy. He remembered how Duke stood protectively by his side when they encountered wildlife on their hikes, a quiet guardian ready to shield his friend from harm. And he remembered the quiet evenings by the fire, Duke curled peacefully at his feet, the gentle rise and fall of the dog's chest offering Mark the comfort he desperately needed now. The pain of knowing Duke was living a life he would never be part of was almost unbearable. Mark imagined Duke's confusion, wondering if the dog still remembered him or if his new life had replaced those cherished memories. Officer Bradford, noticing Mark's deepening sadness, paused at his cell during morning rounds. "You all right, Mark?" he asked kindly. Mark nodded slowly, eyes distant and weary. "Just thinking about Duke," he murmured softly, voice thick with emotion. Bradford understood, offering only a gentle nod of sympathy before moving on. Alone once more, Mark closed his eyes, whispering softly into the silence of his cell, "Wherever you are, Duke, I hope you're happy. I hope someone loves you as much as I do." Mark's heart ached deeply, the weight of loneliness settling heavily upon him once again. Though Duke might never return to his side, the memories they had forged together became his lifeline. Holding on to them, Mark knew, was his only way of surviving another day. Months passed quietly within Blue River Prison, each day feeling more indistinct and colorless than the last. But one chilly Montana morning, a buzz of excitement stirred through the normally subdued corridors. The prison's administration had decided to launch a new animal therapy program, aiming to ease the emotional burden of inmates and improve morale. Dogs from local animal shelters were brought in, accompanied by volunteers eager to help prisoners reconnect with their softer, more compassionate sides. Inmates lined up in the yard, intrigued by the rare opportunity to experience something so different from their daily routine. Among them, Mark stood quietly, eyes lowered, hands folded nervously. He hadn't wanted to participate at first, fearing the pain of memories it might bring. But Officer Bradford had gently encouraged him, saying, "Maybe seeing the dogs will help, Mark. Give it a chance." Reluctantly, Mark had agreed. Now he stood shivering slightly in the brisk air, heart aching at the sound of playful barking coming closer. He heard laughter and friendly greetings as the first volunteers led their furry companions into view, a medley of wagging tails and joyful panting. Mark's heart tightened, memories of Duke suddenly vivid again. Then, Mark's breath caught painfully. Among the dogs, trotting across the courtyard, was an older German shepherd, walking slowly but with unmistakable grace. His fur had thinned a bit, peppered with gray around his muzzle, and his gait was cautious, reflecting his advanced age. Yet his eyes, gentle and wise, scanned the crowd with quiet curiosity, still holding that unmistakable dignity Mark knew so well. "Duke," Mark whispered under his breath, his voice trembling with disbelief and emotion. Tears filled his eyes, blurring the sight of the dog he'd missed desperately for so long. He had never imagined that Duke would return to him, even for a moment. The dog paused briefly, ears perked, perhaps sensing something familiar amidst the unfamiliar crowd. Mark held his breath, unable to move, heart pounding painfully in his chest. But Duke continued walking slowly alongside a volunteer, a young woman named Emily Carter, friendly and compassionate, her bright auburn hair pulled into a ponytail beneath a baseball cap. Emily smiled warmly as she guided Duke and introduced him softly to the inmates around her. Mark stood frozen, unable to tear his eyes away, even as Duke walked past him without recognition. Officer Bradford, noticing Mark's distress, stepped quietly to his side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "That's him, isn't it?" Bradford asked softly. Mark nodded silently, unable to trust his voice, eyes fixed on Duke, who now sat quietly, watching the other dogs with calm patience. Emily noticed Mark's emotional reaction and approached cautiously, sensing a deep connection between the man and the gentle shepherd. "This is Duke," she said warmly, her voice soft and kind. "He's been at our shelter for about a year now. He's older, quieter than most, but there's something special about him." Mark finally managed to whisper hoarsely, "He was mine, a long time ago. I thought I'd never see him again." Emily's eyes widened with surprise and sympathy. "Oh, I didn't know," she murmured softly, glancing tenderly at Duke, whose wise eyes met hers calmly. "He's such a sweet soul." Mark kneeled slowly, cautiously reaching out his hand toward Duke, hoping for a spark of recognition. The German shepherd gazed calmly at him, ears gently pricked, tail swaying lightly in quiet acknowledgement. Duke seemed unsure, patient yet distant, as though carefully studying Mark's face, trying to remember. The seconds stretched painfully, Mark's heart aching for the warmth of Duke's unconditional love once again. The shepherd finally stepped closer, sniffed Mark's hand briefly, then sat quietly, leaning slightly into Mark's touch, a subtle but meaningful gesture of trust. It wasn't the joyous reunion Mark had imagined, but it was enough to bring tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Officer Bradford and Emily exchanged quiet glances, respecting the tender moment unfolding before them. Bradford gently squeezed Mark's shoulder, understanding without words how profoundly meaningful this meeting was for him. For the rest of the session, Mark sat quietly beside Duke, softly stroking his fur, feeling the shepherd's quiet presence soothe his wounded heart. It wasn't the same bond they had once shared, but Mark knew that Duke remembered him, even vaguely. It gave him hope, something he hadn't felt in years, reminding him that perhaps redemption, even in its smallest form, was still possible. As the session ended and the volunteers led the dogs away, Mark watched Duke quietly leave the yard, heart heavy yet strangely comforted. He knew he couldn't control the future, but the small thread connecting him once more to Duke gave him strength. Maybe, just maybe, life still had moments worth holding on to. In the weeks following their brief reunion, Mark continued to visit Duke regularly during the animal therapy sessions, each encounter leaving a bittersweet ache in his heart. The older German Shepherd remained gentle but distant, his deep brown eyes searching Mark's face with quiet uncertainty. Mark, though saddened by Duke's hesitation, accepted the pain quietly, never pushing Duke beyond the dog's comfort zone. Despite the gentle reassurance of Emily Carter, the kind volunteer with compassionate eyes and a soothing voice, Mark often felt a wave of hopelessness washing over him after each session. Emily, sensing Mark's disappointment, offered encouragement. "Give him time, Mark. Duke's trying. Somewhere deep down he still knows you." Yet, Mark began to doubt if Duke truly remembered. Perhaps, he thought, time had changed them both beyond recognition. Each evening, back in his solitary cell, Mark wrestled with memories of their shared past, the warm glow of companionship, now a distant, fading dream. One calm afternoon, beneath a sky heavy with autumn clouds, Mark waited patiently in the prison yard, watching as Emily led Duke toward him once again. Duke moved slowly, his movements gentle and deliberate, his coat gleaming softly in the muted sunlight. Mark noticed the gray hairs more clearly now, mixed generously within Duke's rich black and tan fur, highlighting the passage of time. Emily quietly handed Duke's leash to Mark, smiling reassuringly. "Maybe just spend some quiet time together today," she suggested softly. Mark nodded gratefully, guiding Duke to a quiet bench beneath a tall maple tree, where colorful leaves drifted lazily around them. Sitting side by side, Mark stroked Duke's fur gently, his heart aching silently at the polite but unfamiliar posture Duke maintained. He spoke softly, words tinged with gentle sadness. "Remember when we used to sit outside on days like this, buddy? You'd lay your head on my lap and look at me like I was your entire world." Mark paused, voice breaking slightly. "You were mine, Duke. You still are." As Mark spoke, Duke's ears perked slightly, eyes focusing more intently on the man beside him, as if something familiar stirred within him. Mark, encouraged by Duke's small reaction, continued quietly, voice warm and trembling with emotion. "I know I've changed. I know it's been so long, Duke. But I've never stopped loving you." For a moment, the yard seemed to still around them, as though holding its breath. Duke turned slowly toward Mark, leaning forward gently, sniffing the air near Mark's shoulder. Mark froze, his heart racing with quiet hope. The German Shepherd hesitated briefly, then moved closer, pressing his head softly against Mark's chest. The quiet, simple gesture carried a deep tenderness that shattered Mark's carefully constructed composure. "Duke," Mark whispered shakily, gently embracing the older dog. Duke sighed softly, finally relaxing against Mark, as if releasing years of uncertainty. Emily, standing at a respectful distance, covered her mouth in quiet awe, eyes glistening with tears. Even Officer Bradford, observing from afar, felt a lump rise in his throat at the touching scene unfolding before them. Mark buried his face gently into Duke's thick fur, tears streaming silently down his face. For the first time in years, he felt genuine comfort, an indescribable warmth spreading slowly through his wounded heart. Duke's breathing slowed to match Mark's own, each heartbeat reinforcing their connection, healing wounds Mark had feared would never mend. Around them, other inmates watched silently, deeply moved by the quiet, emotional reunion. Even hardened men felt their hearts soften, touched profoundly by the quiet strength of the bond between man and dog. It was a reminder of love's resilience, its incredible power to survive separation, silence, and even the harshest tests of time. When the session ended, Mark gently rose, reluctant to release Duke from his embrace. Emily approached, her eyes tender. "That was beautiful, Mark. He remembers now," she said softly. Mark smiled gratefully, nodding, unable to trust his voice to speak. As Duke walked away slowly with Emily, he glanced back one last time, his wise eyes locking onto Mark's own. In that quiet moment, Mark knew their bond had returned fully, strong and unwavering. Though their paths had diverged painfully for years, their hearts had found each other once again, reminding Mark that hope, love, and redemption were possible, even in the darkest places. Mark returned to his cell that evening, his heart lighter than it had been in years. And for the first night in a very long time, his dreams were gentle, peaceful, filled with the warmth of Duke's quiet presence and the promise of hope restored. Word of the emotional reunion between Mark and Duke quickly spread throughout Blue River Prison, gently touching hearts and igniting hope among inmates and staff alike. The quiet, powerful bond they shared became a beacon of comfort, proving that even within prison walls, compassion and forgiveness could flourish. Prisoners who had once felt nothing but bitterness began to open up during therapy sessions, finding solace and strength in the gentle presence of Duke, whose calm dignity seemed to reach deeply into even the most hardened hearts. Officer Tom Bradford observed the subtle but significant shift within the prison's atmosphere, amazed at how one aging German Shepherd could bring about such a meaningful change. Duke soon became a permanent part of the therapy program, with Emily Carter, the compassionate volunteer with her bright auburn hair and warm voice, proudly guiding him each day through the gates. Emily often spoke softly to Duke, praising him for his gentle kindness, aware that this special dog was indeed healing hearts with his quiet strength. Each morning, Mark waited eagerly, his heart lifting at the familiar sight of Duke, padding slowly toward him, eyes soft with recognition and affection. Duke's daily visits became the highlight of Mark's day, providing comfort and hope, gently guiding him back toward emotional healing and self-forgiveness. Through Duke's unwavering presence, Mark began to slowly release the heavy guilt he had carried for years, learning that forgiveness, even self-forgiveness, was the most powerful form of healing. Other inmates began to approach Mark cautiously, sharing their own stories, inspired by the gentle bond between man and dog. Mark, once withdrawn and isolated, found himself connecting quietly but deeply with those around him, his empathy and compassion renewed by Duke's unwavering loyalty. The entire prison gradually transformed into a place where even the smallest acts of kindness could make profound differences. Months later, Mark's day of release finally arrived, bringing both joy and anxiety. He stood outside Blue River Prison's gates, clutching his few belongings, heart racing with uncertainty. Beside him, Officer Bradford placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, smiling warmly. "You'll be all right, Mark. Remember, you're never alone, not anymore." Mark nodded gratefully, tears in his eyes. Just then, Emily approached, leading Duke gently toward him. "We thought you might need a friend on your first day of freedom," she said kindly, handing Mark Duke's leash. Duke stepped forward eagerly, pressing his warm body against Mark's leg, eyes shining with quiet joy. Mark knelt, wrapping his arms gently around Duke's neck, heart overwhelmed with gratitude. Together, Mark and Duke returned to Bitterroot Valley, the familiar landscapes and gentle breezes welcoming them back home. Mark soon became an active volunteer at the same animal shelter that had cared for Duke, assisting Emily in community outreach programs. They visited schools, nursing homes, and community centers, sharing their story of redemption and the extraordinary power of forgiveness and loyalty. People listened quietly, moved by the bond between the gentle, aging German Shepherd and the humble, reflective man who had overcome immense personal struggles. Duke's gentle eyes and Mark's sincere voice touched hearts, proving that everyone deserved a second chance, a new beginning. In time, their story became a powerful reminder throughout Montana of compassion's incredible ability to heal even the deepest wounds. Years later, Duke peacefully passed away, held gently in Mark's loving arms, surrounded by those whose lives he had deeply touched. Mark placed his hand softly on Duke's chest, feeling the slow, gentle rhythm fade, whispering tenderly, "Thank you, Duke. You saved me in ways you'll never know." Though Duke was gone, Mark carried the lessons he had learned, continuing their meaningful work within the community. He often reflected on their extraordinary journey, knowing he owed his newfound peace entirely to Duke's unconditional love and unwavering faithfulness. And deep within his heart, Mark understood clearly now that even when life seemed utterly dark, forgiveness and love always had the power to guide a lost soul back toward the light. In the end, life gently reminds us that love and loyalty have the power to heal even the deepest wounds, guiding lost hearts back to hope, forgiveness, and peace. If Mark and Duke's touching journey resonated with you, please consider joining our community by subscribing, because together, we can continue sharing stories that speak softly to the soul.